Edward Bernays was one of the founders of the field of public relations, or as he called it early in his career, propaganda. He began doing this very early on in the 20th century, during the First World War. He was part of the War Propaganda Bureau known as the Committee on Public Information, or the Creel Commission. Persuasion previously, or public relations previously, had been the work of journalists. In other words, let's make it sound like news, let's make it taste like news, let's make it look like news. Bernays felt that the facts in and of themselves were of no moment. He believed that people were driven by instinct, by their unconscious, and by irrational appeals. He also believed that the media system provided railroad tracks along which ideas could be pumped, and that it was necessary to reach people's inner lives, their unconscious lives, their instincts, their spinal cords, in order to be able to get the public to agree to whatever executive actions you wish to take. When you talk about manufacture of consent or manipulation of consent, built into those phrases is the idea that there are these unseen engineers who stand behind the scenes and help to shape people's agreement to policies that are being decided upon by other people. So on the other hand, I do feel that in order for democracy to be possible, there needs to be an ongoing back and forth of persuasion. And I think that without a public that is capable of engaging and taking on the issues that affect their lives and being the most informed about them instead of looking for experts all of the time, it's that kind of situation which will mean that consent comes out of agreement rather than manipulation. The manufacture of consent, to a large extent, relies on the idea of individualism. In other words, that each person is an isolated unit. And if you can understand how to push the button to that sense of isolation, and you can in fact encourage that sense of isolation, and encourage the fear and loathing that goes along with that sense of isolation, then you've got them in your hand. The first piece of advice I would give to someone is stop being someone. Because as long as you're alone as someone, then in certain ways you're not part of an engaged democratic public. So I think part of what needs to happen is for the public to become a public and not just an agglomeration of someones. Education is key. People need to understand the history of persuasion. They need to know the history of how the great wars got sold to the people. They need to know the history of how the great leaders got to be the great leaders, even though many of them didn't deserve to be. And in fact, we're acting against the best interests of the common person. Is when a form of communication or of persuasion leaves people less aware of the world than they were before they experienced it, then that's something that's a menace. Because making people unaware is one of the basic systems of rule. On the other hand, if you develop tools of persuasion which leave people more aware and more understanding of the world around them, that for me is a very progressive and positive use. There's nothing wrong with persuasion. as long as it takes place on an even playing field and is not controlled by money. And who has a say is not controlled by money. There are always interests, and there are always interests. That's it. Nobody is a neutral observer. The idea of objective news, the idea that somehow news is something that was grown in a test tube by a scientist in a white coat, that's an illusion. And no news organization, no storyteller, no journalist should be able to hide behind the idea that there are no interests involved. Because there are always interests. What needs to be evaluated is who benefits, who gets hurt. There is no neutral. That's the result of statistics. And one of the things that statisticians know is that even if you can define the norm, the neutral, that reality is made up of many different positions. And also, what is the quality of the information that's being presented? And that's stuff that can be checked on. In other words, if you have a public that is willing to dig they must. I can, I just try not to.
Anyway.
Because you see, the soundbite is part of the problem.
Sorry, what?
The soundbite is part of the problem.
Yeah.
That is to say, I understand what you're looking for, okay? I know how to edit. I know what editing is about. I know how to see how editing works. And particularly if you're looking for 4 3-minute pieces or 3 4-minute pieces, then you don't want too much going on there, right? But part of the problem is that the very structures of media, and this is something that needs to be addressed, and that is that the very way in which information is structured.
It's not ideal, I know.
It's not that it's not ideal, it's that it discourages thought. It discourages nuance. It discourages on the one hand and on the other hand. Because you talk about something like like rhetoric. In the United States and in the English language, rhetoric means lying today. But rhetoric is also about the ability to present knowledge, information, ideas, a worldview in a way that isn't simply a list of bloodless facts. And I'm not trying to remake the world here. I understand the problem. But, good editing can take little snippets of good stuff.
Yeah, we'll